Well, Danny, what a view. We are at the amazing remains of the legendary fortress of Masada in a very remote place, but tell us why this place was so important and give us a little bit of the background and the history.
Well, first of all, topographically, this is an ideal place for humans to protect themselves. This is a rock plateau, very steep on all sides, and the surface is nearly completely flat, okay? Maybe even King David was here. The Old Testament tells us of David hiding when he's escaping from Saul. He goes from En-Gedi and then he hides in the fortresses of En-Gedi. We did find some Iron Age pottery here, but historically we know for sure that Herod is the first guy to recognize the benefits of this site and build it all up. Historians call him Herod the Great. Archaeologists like titling him as Herod the Great Builder. The guy just loved to build. And here he takes this rock plateau and he transforms it. He makes a wall all around the perimeter. And in the northern end, he makes this big and beautiful northern palace complex with a tower where we are located to monitor, okay, to protect the northern palace, storerooms, a bathhouse, and hanging against the abyss, a beautiful big palace complex in 3 terraces. This is Herod.
And how did Herod find this place? It's so remote, Danny. It's in the middle of nowhere, quite literally in the desert.
Yes, Josephus gives us this information. He tells us that when he is reigning in the first years, he is battling against Matithya Antigonos. In one of those conflicts, he has to flee to Nabatea. He's half Nabatean after all. And then he stops here. When the site is not built up, it's not protected, but the topography provides him protection, but there's no water. And he's dying of thirst, but at the last minute, according to Josephus, a heavy rain filled up some cavities here, and he managed to last the siege of Matithya and the Persians. And later, as king, he remembered the benefits, but also the problem of water. And he knew if you cannot solve the water supply here, this place is useless. And he solved it big time, okay? There's a whole engineering, amazing mechanism that ensured that there'll be enough water here to last a very long siege. Who knows how many people have died in the process of making this tower, for instance. But in the back, you had here all the wealth that you could expect for royalty. Fully operating bathhouse, very well preserved. 18 store halls, some of them containing pottery shards with the titulus picti, the indication of what was originally inside the jar. Well-grinded fig, a green onion, 78 apples in alcoholic sauce, and at least 13 jars had a Latin inscription indicating it's a special order from central Italy in the year correlating with 19 BCE by Reg Herod Judaic. He ordered them. Reg Herod Judaic, king of the Jews, Herod, wanted to make sure there's a bit of Chianti in case he has to spend a night.
Of course, a luxurious lifestyle, the king. Now, right now, we are standing on a watchtower.
Yes, this is the watchtower that protects the northern palace complex. Behind you, there's a moat. And Herod not only designed it to be very extravagant, but also to be very protected. As if the site doesn't provide enough protection, the northern palace complex also has layers of protection in it. Okay, Herod, through this site, we realize just how much he was paranoid, which Josephus describes quite vividly. Extravagance and paranoia are the 2 combined elements that appear again and again, both in the historical documentation of him as well as the architectural legacy he left behind.
Well, Danny, Herod the Great was known for his palaces, and Masada is no exception. We're standing in the remains of one of King Herod's palaces.
Yes, this is the top porch, okay? The bedrooms in the back. You can imagine Herod stretching out in the morning, going out to this very balcony and enjoying this majestic view of the Judean desert. On the lower level, you had 2 more terraces where the middle part and the lower part of the palace were placed. A spiral hidden stairway connected all of them. That collapsed. There's none left of it. But there's still a good amount of it that is well preserved. showing mosaic floors, frescoes, you know, royalty.
Yeah.
In
And
the
this
middle
is-
of nowhere.
Yes, and this is hugging the cliff pretty tightly here,
Yes.
this palace.
I wonder how many slaves have died in the operation of building all of this. There must have been some scaffoldings to hold it.
Of course, and it's a steep fall.
This is Herod pushing the envelope, stretching the limits of Roman technology, something that nowhere else in the Roman Empire existed at the time.
Wow. And this was in the period of during the destruction of the Second Temple, which Jesus talked about. One day the temple, you know, will not be standing here. And these are the ashes that the rebels fled from here to Masada. They probably thought this place was impregnable. The rebels were here for a while, and according to Josephus, I believe, maybe 1,000 people here set up shop at Masada.
967 people. He gives us a
Wow.
certain exact number.
Wow.
I personally found a silver coin that was minted in Masada by the rebels and taken by them. The specific one I found was right next to the tower. 7 years after the time of Herod, the Jewish rebels flee from burning Jerusalem and take shelter in what they believe to be an impregnable fortress.
Yeah.
Okay, so well protected with a water system that could supply water to last a long siege. But the Romans eventually come after them. The whole 10th Legion, in fact, is sent for this mission. Around the site to this day, you can see 8 camps, right?
It's amazing.
This is Camp F by the labeling of Yadin and his team. This is perhaps where Flavio Silva, the commander of the 10th Legion, sat and commanded the creation of a ramp which will reach the top of Masada to knock it down, to conquer it.
They wanted to come out here to Masada and crush the last remaining
No one
rebels.
is going to escape the Roman punishment for rebellion.
Yeah,
You don't pay your taxes, you're going to pay for this.
with your
Okay?
lives.
You don't submit to the yoke of the Roman authority.
Yeah.
You're going to either lose your head or be enslaved.
Yeah.
And a whole 10th Legion plus auxiliary forces were probably sent here. By the size of the camps, we think that some 7,000 men were
Wow.
brought here to conquer the place.
And they were out here for a long time, and it was hot, and I'm sure they were miserable and angry and ready to storm this fortress.
They were quite upset, I'm sure,
Yeah.
the Roman forces for this specific task. They were probably eager to get it done as quickly as possible and get out of here. They're coming here also at the spring.
Yeah.
Josephus doesn't actually tell us how long the siege took place, but it does tell us that it was in the springtime, which means water, rain, maybe in 9 months.
Yeah.
The closest water source is in Gedi, there in the horizon. It's a 6 hours walk from here. The rebels had plenty of water from last winter. The Romans had to make sure that they get water and food to last here. So they were determined to get the job done and as quickly as possible.
Danny, I guess the big question is, how did it come to this? How did it come to the point where the rebels had to flee out here in this remote place atop Masada? Give us a backdrop of what was going on between the years 66 and roughly AD 70, the Roman-Jewish wars as they're known.
Yes, it's a very sad and tragic story indeed. Around the 50s of the first century, the temple in Jerusalem is finally complete, standing in full glory.
Herod's temple, as it's
Yes.
been known.
Completed by his grandson. He does some work around it. And 15 years later, on the spring of year 66, the Jews decide to make a critical decision and not pay the taxes, not give the daily sacrifice to the Roman emperor. Okay? Big mistake, as I said in the movie Pretty Woman. Okay? Don't mess with the Romans. Definitely not in the first century. But they didn't ask my advice. And the consequences were horrific. The Romans did not endure this attitude, and 4 legions were sent here by the veteran general Vespasian and his son Titus, and they just crushed the Jewish resistance, starting at the Battle of Yodfat and moving on to Tiberias and Migdal.
So in the Galilee region.
First, the Galilee was crushed, and then the 4 legions moved, the 10th Legion along the Jordan Valley, the others through the coast, and they all met on Mount Scopus, where he could scope.
Outside Jerusalem, of
Okay,
course.
at this stage, by the way, Vespasian goes back to Rome and crowns himself, and Titus, his son, completes the job.
Titus. Now Vespasian becomes emperor, and he sends Titus here to finish the job. And so this starts in roughly AD 66, Danny. Fast forward to AD 70, where it sadly culminates.
Yeah.
with the destruction of the Second Temple.
Yes, Titus the son is now the commander, and Josephus describes in very great graphic, bloody detail
Yeah.
of how they take wall by wall, and people they catch, they just crucify them against the walls as a psychological war. They ran out of wood at some point because so many people were put to death in this terrible way. And on the 9th day in the month of Av by Jewish calendar, the temple itself catches fire.
The same day, the 9th of Av, famous date in Jewish history, the Babylonians destroyed the first temple.
Yes.
Danny, hellish conditions. When you read Josephus, an extra biblical account, which gives us some amazing insights into that period, when you read Josephus, even before the Romans really breached the walls, there was kind of a civil war going on inside the old city of Jerusalem between the various Jewish factions. Tell us about that, because that's where the rebels emerged from.
Yes, and that's part of why it's such a tragedy. Jerusalem was actually burning from within even before the Romans arrived. Okay, Jerusalem was in a in a boiling pot of different orders that were hating one another. You had the Sadducites, you had the priests, you had the Pharisees, and you had the Sicaries, which were the most fanatics. And it was the Sicaries, by the way, who at least led the group up here on Masada. They were following an attitude that we should not subdue to Roman power, and anyone else who does is our enemy as well.
Danny, fascinating stuff. There was slaughter, as we said, when the Romans finally were able to conquer Jerusalem. They spared no quarter, women, children. And it would have been a similar situation here at Masada, but then things took an interesting turn, which we're going to talk about next.
Up next, the rebels make a fateful decision that cements Masada's place in history. You won't want to miss the shocking outcome of the Roman siege. Don't move.
Now, Danny, this site was not built by Herod the Great, but it was an integral part, I'd imagine, of daily life for the rebels who camped out here and were fleeing Rome.
Yes, the rebels took over part of the wall of the site, which we think was originally used as a stable, and added benches that enable a lot of people to sit together. How do you say to sit together or to convene in Greek? Synagoge. Synagogue.
A synagogue.
This is a synagogue. This is one of the earliest synagogues in Jewish history. This is where the Jewish rebels sat, convened, read the Torah. We know so because we found 2 fragments in the room here in the back. And maybe this is the place where the Jewish rebels decided to make this critical decision of committing suicide. They create purity ritual baths, mikvehs. We found purity stone vessels like the ones mentioned in the Gospel of John, chapter 2. And to the very last minute, they're trying to preserve their specific Jewish lifestyle.
Well, Danny, we're overlooking a very fateful place for the rebels here at Masada. The Roman military machine builds a siege engine to come against this fortress. Tell us what happened.
Here is the ramp. You can see it to this day, which is man-made. We found wooden beams beneath it, proving that it was all designed with a lot of labor, never reaching the top, but enough to put a tower over it, and at the top a battering ram pounding against the wall, right here. Yes, and this is the only part where the wall of Masada is missing. You can imagine the defenders seeing all of this, and when it falls down, the Romans decide to retreat and make the final conquest the next morning.
So this was highly effective, this battering ram, it seems. And I can only imagine, Danny, there's women, there's children up here. The intimidation factor of that battering ram, just the sight of it and the noise of it, the constant pounding, as you said.
And knowing what's to follow.
Yeah, and what was to follow, as we said earlier, the Romans were very unforgiving.
Oh yeah.
And they planned to come up here, and remember, these are guys who were probably thirsty, frustrated, hot, hungry, and they wanted to wreak vengeance on the Jews up here on Masada.
Yeah, the guys here knew the consequences are going to be horrific. But they had another night. The final blow is going to be the next day. And what can they really do? Fight till the bitter end? Give up? Their leader, assembling all the men, decided for everyone, let us die a noble death.
Eliezer?
Eleazar ben Yair was his name according to Josephus. Let us die when it is still in our hands instead of subduing to the Romans. And the followers followed.
And the decision was?
The decision was to commit suicide. The few men chose for everyone else. Josephus tells us that every person went to his own family and caressing them, he performed the deed. Okay, he killed his own wife and children. And then 10 people were chosen to kill all the others. And one of them was chosen by Lot to kill the others. So technically only one person committed suicide, which he did according to Josephus in the northern palace complex of Herod. And Yigael Yadin in the 1960s finds in the northern palace complex evidence of a male, a female, and a child, which he says, can we disprove the possibility maybe this is the last family of Masada?
So a massive suicide pact of the defenders here at Masada, nearly 1,000 people.
Yes.
In a mass suicide, rather than to submit to the Romans. And as you said, Danny, it would have been mass slaughter of the males, rape, enslavement of the women, of the children.
What would you do? You know?
What would we do? I have a wife, I have 2 little girls myself. But then there's another school of thought that says where there's life, there's hope.
Yeah.
But we weren't here. And talk about a tough decision. Well, Danny, the Roman siege of Masada, the defeat of the rebels, was not the end of the story for this legendary desert fortress. Tell us what came next.
Well, the Romans had here a force station for a while, but then they left the place. It was abandoned for quite some time, and around the 5th century, Christian monks discovered the place, and they had one single building, a church, facing the east. Its architecture is also different from what we've seen from Herodian times, and we don't know for how long they stayed here, but with the Muslim takeover, it's abandoned again, and this time even the location of Masada is forgotten. No one knew where it was until 1838, when an American scholar views it from the distance and suggests this is Masada.
So for probably 1,000 years, if not more, this place was abandoned and lie dormant. No one knew it was here, the legendary Masada.
And then in the 1920s, 30s, the Zionist movement adopts the site. Especially famous is the figure of Shmariau Gutman. He's an educator. He brings youth groups up to the top, and he tells them about the story of Masada and the rebels that had to commit suicide. And the youth groups would shout against the cliffs, "Masada is not gonna fall again," with the echo resonating with the sound. And for the Zionist movement, this is a very, very significant site. This is a site that shows where Jews fought for freedom till the very last minute. Okay, and this is what we're trying to form now again, a place for asylum for Jews from all over the world. So Jews don't have to take anything from anyone anymore. And you know what? This is the state of mind of Israel to this day. We have formed a state so Jews can feel secured and determine their fate after centuries of persecutions, of pogroms, of Holocaust. This is a very meaningful site in symbolizing what the state of Israel is for us today. And if you ever see F-16s flying above our heads towards the east, okay, with bombs to neutralize an Iranian nuclear threat, the pilots also have in the back of their minds the symbol of the site. Masada is not going to fall again.
The people of Israel live, Danny, never to be uprooted again, and fulfilling Bible prophecy to boot. Danny the Digger, thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure.
It has been amazing here on Masada. We'll do it here again somewhere in the land of Israel. Coming up, some final thoughts after the break from the one and only Fortress Masada. It's the Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel, only right here